Hello everybody, my name is Lance, and I have a pretty interesting video for you all today. So I try to make my videos cinematic by adding sound design, playing around with camera angles, frame rates, and filters, and I've been asked a few times how I do stuff like that. So today we're going to talk about how to use camera angles. And the way I'm going to teach that is by creating an example. So obviously I'm in a boat, and we have this nice path I've carved out of this mangrove forest, and I'm going to start a replay mod recording. So what I'm going to do is just go through the forest, maybe look around, admire the scenery, and casually do a turn here, and boom. What a fantastic shot. But I picked up a lily pad and I hit one of the blocks, so I'm gonna redo that. My first lesson to you is if something doesn't work, don't be afraid to try again, because a lot of the time you end up shooting more than one take. So we're gonna try this again, going through the forest, taking a look around, admiring the scenery. I saw some fish to our right, so that should give us a little bit more to work with. And there we go. Let's stop our recording and go check out what we just got. So here we are in the world. I've got myself in the boat. We've got the forest that we just went through. How do we make this more cinematic? For some reason, there's a problem with particles, and I'm not sure it's actually happening in this recording, but for 5 seconds before you actually have the thing you want to record, that's when you've put your first time keyframe. So I'm pretty sure this is when I start going. So I'm just gonna add a time keyframe here. And we don't need to add a position because right now we're just going to focus on the segment we want to record. So we're going to move our time keyframe here because this is the second take and this is the one we want. A little bit of time before we actually start moving, and do the look around, going around the corner. Pretty smooth. Don't hit that piece of land there, and we don't pick up a lily pad. That was the shot. So how do we take advantage of camera angles and making it more dynamic? So here's what I was talking about with the particles being all weird. There were lily pads here. I broke them, and then when I press play, they take a second for them to go away, and that will show up after you start rendering. So that's why I say leave a little bit of time before you start. Otherwise, you'll get particles like that. One thing that kind of sucks is that Replay Mod doesn't have a zoom function. So a way you can get around that is by adjusting your FOV. I am by no means a film expert, and I'm still learning about filmmaking, but I think when you adjust your FOV, you're also changing your focal length. This is about the only thing we can use for zoom, because zoomify, logical zoom, none of those actually translate to the rendering after you finish recording. So to replicate that, we're just going to lower our FOV down, and I usually have it at 30, which is the minimum value. And you can already see this feels much more dynamic than just this shot right here. Like, oh yeah, that looks pretty nice, but then if you turn down the FOV, now it looks more enclosed, farther things feel closer. I feel like more of the focal point of the shot. To me, this just feels right. A big part of filmmaking is getting creative and trying shots. So leave room for experimenting when you're playing around with the replay mod. Most of the time when I'm shooting my cinematics, there's a shot or two that I just don't include, and that can either be for timing purposes or it just doesn't really fit the scene I'm shooting. So we'll start out with a basic angle. I'm going to keyframe my position point here, and then just move a little bit further into the forest. Let it play, and then it's past me, so now I'm going to do another one right here. Maybe I'll come by and use these fish in the background, and then I'll place another keyframe. I'll come up above the tree and place a keyframe up here. And then finally, as I complete my route, I'm gonna move just slightly and then turn as I fade away. Here we go, and then I finish with the keyframe. Now we did have a time keyframe over here, but that's okay because we're gonna cut down the shot in our editing software so that it only lasts for these 14 seconds. So let's go ahead and render it. I like to name my files just so I know what I'm looking at. So we'll call this Swamp Drive 1. 90% of the time there ends up being a take 2 and it's like Swamp Drive 1, 2. We can already get a preview here. We could have done that in game too, but half the time I forgot to do that. So this is our shot right here. And it doesn't look that bad. It's not super dynamic, but it follows the character, it shows the journey, and it does a generally pretty decent job of telling a story. But we can do better. Well, first off, we can do that first shot I was showing you guys earlier. We turn down our FOV, and we're gonna place a keyframe right here. Wait for my character to go by, and that's it. That's all we need. And we're gonna end it right here. There we go. We're gonna do something a little bit different this time. In my cinematics, I like to cut a lot so that you get different angles and it doesn't just glide from one to another. So we're gonna do that. We have that first shot with the camera gliding from here to here. So let's render that and check out the preview with that button. This is what we're working with. So we let those particles fade away, and then I start to drive through. And now we have much more of a dynamic camera angle. And you'll see my camera stop because the keyframe for the position was before the keyframe for time. And so if we wanted to make it longer, we could just drag out that position keyframe. One of the best things to spice up your cinematics is just add shaders. So I always use complementary reimagined. There's a few others I've been experimenting with. Rethinking Voxels is another spectacular one, and I always run complementary on the lowest graphic preset, and that's just because I get really good frames and it still looks great. Now, because you're rendering these replays, I'm pretty sure you should get good frame rate regardless, so you could put on a higher quality shader and still get good frame rate in your renders. I'm going to turn up the graphic preset quality to medium. There we go, look at that. Another reason I like potato mode is because it keeps the vanilla lighting even in darker areas. So I think I'm actually going to go back and change this to low. Now we're going to re-render it and see how it looks. Here we go. Now that we have shaders on, this already looks incredibly cool. And it's a little bit choppy, that's just because it's actively rendering the shot. Once it exports completely, it should be completely fine. So now what I have in mind is to have a very low to the water shot and have the focal point start on the fish, but then gradually change to myself. I want the water just to be in view of the camera, and we're going to start our position keyframe here on the fish. We'll do a second keyframe right here just so it keeps that position. Change this to linear so it doesn't actually move the camera from this first to second keyframe. And then here I come, and I'm going to start to move the camera. We're going to end this shot with another keyframe looking where I was. I'm just behind these leaves here, and hopefully that will get us the shot we want. Here's what we're looking at now. So that's not the best shot in the world. Actually, that's not too bad. We'll stick with that. All right, so next up, I want to have a shot where as I'm coming around this corner, we get a drone shot and it's just looking straight down. And that looks pretty good. All right, we'll start here. And one thing that's really cool is you can move these position keyframes. So if the timing's not quite right, you can mess around with it. Here I come. And then right as I get to where I start, do right there, perfect. And I almost had it on point. I could just move that right here. Actually, I'm just going to delete that keyframe, make a new one. There we go. Now it's right on the playhead, and we'll start it. And I'm going to move as horizontally straight as I can. I don't think there's a better way to do this. I'm going to keep the camera rotation as steady as I can, lining myself up with the blocks. I'll move a little bit further. There we go. And that should be good. As I go away, I'm going to stop it right here. And this is what we're looking at. That's not quite right. So that could probably be from the replay. If I go back a little bit, it might look a little bit better. Let's try that. Okay, so right now we don't actually have a shot because we didn't have any position keyframe up until right now. It's always better to have more footage than less because you can always cut away. Whereas if you have nothing, then what is there to shoot? It looked like when I didn't have a position keyframe at the start, it didn't render anything over here. So it was loading when it started playing that shot. So we're just going to place a keyframe right next to that first one. And so that way it's rendering everything over here and it doesn't have to load. And once again, we'll change this to linear so the camera is very consistent and it doesn't mess with this angle to that angle over there. I'm very aware that my explaining is terrible, but I'm trying to do as best as I can. So here we go. This is the shot we're going to cut away. And then right as we hit this keyframe, this is when our shot starts and the camera starts moving. And we're going past it, and that looks way better. I also would like to stress that there's nothing wrong with adding a few extra shots just to play around with. We have the whole journey from start to finish in 4 shots. But there's nothing wrong with just adding a few more just in case you don't like what you got. And I want to experiment with the tilt feature a little bit. So then we can get more interesting shots by rotating the camera altogether. So I'm thinking I'm going to want myself coming through here and just kind of passing the camera. And I want the camera to pull back and then slightly rotate just to give it a little bit of extra liveliness and movement in the frame. And we'll place another position keyframe. And this is when I'll start to pull back. So as I'm playing, start to turn here, and then I go past and right there. And then I'll just do my tilt a little bit, just a little bit. I don't want too much movement. So otherwise it's going to be a little bit much to handle, but obviously you can get creative with it, see how you like it. Add another keyframe there, and let's go ahead and preview that just to see what we got. Here we come. The camera starts to rotate, pass through, and that's a pretty cool shot. One thing you should really think about is what are you trying to capture? For this scene, I wanted to show my character moving through the forest, and so my focus was on the adventure. I wanted to capture the environment around myself, but I wanted myself to also be the focus of it. The reason I chose the shots I did is because this one shows the introduction to the swampy area, the fish shot gives insight into the background, the aerial shot gives us an overview so we can see more of what we're looking at, and the tilt shot was so I can get some extra dynamic. I'm also going to grab some extra footage that isn't revolving around my character just so I can introduce the viewer to the environment. So obviously, yes, we got that shot coming into the forest, but before that there was nothing. So let's grab something that we can say, oh, we're in a mangrove forest, before it just immediately shows our character. So there are two ways I go about doing this. One is with drone shots. From really high above, you can really get a good view of the entire area. This is good for setting your environment and introducing your audience to a location, but because this is a jungle, I would probably opt for something more intimate. This is just trees. It's not super pleasing to look at on its own, so we're gonna go a little bit closer, like this, to show how dense the forest is, curving around the roots of the mangrove, or perhaps some of the wildlife in the swamp. Right away, we got the fish, that turtle. There's supposed to be frogs somewhere in this swamp, but I'm not seeing them. We've also got squid, but this kind of takes away from our swampy ambience, so I'm going to avoid using them as a focal point. I really felt like the frog was essential to getting this opening shot and introducing our location, so I'm going to record the frog there, let him do his thing, jump around. That was a cool shot. That's going to be really nice. All right, so I've done a little bit of editing. I've cut together my clips, and now I want to show you what my thought process was behind it. So first of all, let's go ahead and watch it, just raw footage, and I'll show you what I did. So you see, I've got one showing the jungle. I wanted it to really feel like you were small in this larger environment. I have a few different creatures there to really bring life to the biome. We get a close-up of the frog there, and then this is when our cinematic starts, focusing on our player. Curves around to the fish shot, and then I use the tilt shot here, and then now we have the drone, and finally, oh, that was the finally. So this looks really great. This is not the best cinematic I've ever done, but it's definitely a pretty cool one. I tried to make it so when I reached a certain point in the land, so right at the edge of this entrance, that's when it starts to cut to the next one, and same thing for this one. This one, the camera should be over here for this next shot. I kind of rewound it a little bit just so I had more before it starts cutting. Otherwise, I would have had that as the whole shot, and that's not really much. So because of the perspective, I was able to get away with using a little bit of the footage over here in both shots. So like this section right here is the same as this right here. And you don't really notice it much when you're actually watching it, but it does add a lot to the actual cinematic. Similarly to this shot, this is where our camera was before. I rewound and had that full shot, but because the whole environment is so similar, you don't really notice it all too much unless you're really paying attention to it. So one thing you should note when you're making replay mod footage is that it doesn't export with sound. Now, I don't know if I'm stupid and I've just never figured out how to do this, but there are two ways I can get the bass sound into recording. Number one is actually recording with OBS while I'm making the replay, so I get all the background sounds. I can upload that to Premiere, get rid of the video portion, and just move over the audio. The other option is go back in Survival and then just record individual sounds and place them around the timeline, which obviously is much more tedious, but it also means you can get creative with what sounds you do and don't want in your scene. So that is what I wanted to show for this video. We have a really cool cinematic here that we put together of using various different shot angles and different methods of capturing imagery. We've utilized not only horizontal movement with the camera, but also vertical. We've utilized rotation with the camera. I've tried to teach you how to do a little bit of storytelling with introducing your location, but the biggest thing I want you to take away from all this is experiment. If I went back and remade the cinematic again, I would make it differently each and every time I tried to do it. If you have an idea for a shot, just do it. Like, there's no harm in trying something. The only thing you're really spending is your time, and if you get something cooler out of it by spending a little bit of extra, maybe it's worth it. So yeah, thank you guys so much for watching. I think I'm gonna do another one of these videos on the sound design because that is something I really enjoy making. But please let me know if you'd like to see that. I will see you all in the next one. Have a fantastic day. Bye-bye.